Please leave a comment where you are watching from. After getting married, my husband and I moved into a modest home on a peaceful street in northern Oregon. The house was a single-story bungalow with 2 bedrooms and a small porch out front. It wasn't luxurious by any means, but it had a certain charm, mostly due to the lush greenery that surrounded it and the mature trees that shaded the small backyard. We were in our mid-20s and thinking about starting a family, so the second bedroom was intended to be a nursery one day. That idea made the house feel even more like the beginning of something special. The neighborhood was quiet, filled mostly with retirees and older couples who had lived there for decades. Everyone smiled and waved. Some stopped to chat when we were out tending to the garden or walking to the mailbox. It was the kind of place where people still baked cookies for new residents and handed over spare keys in case of emergencies. We felt lucky to have found it. Across the street lived a man named Walter. He was in his late 60s, always dressed like he was heading to a Sunday brunch or teaching a college seminar. His signature look was a pressed plaid button-down shirt tucked into khaki trousers, often paired with a cardigan or a wool vest. Occasionally, he wore a bow tie, which added a certain scholarly flair to his appearance. He walked with a slight stoop and a slow, deliberate pace, but he never seemed frail, just careful. Walter was a widower, we later learned, with no children and few visitors. Despite his solitude, he was incredibly warm when we first met him. He brought over a small potted fern as a housewarming gift and invited us over for tea the following weekend. My husband, Kyle, hit it off with him right away. They talked about books, music, and even woodworking. Walter had spent years in the construction industry before selling his stake in the company and later working at a used bookshop in town. Kyle admired him for choosing a quieter life over chasing money. Over the months, we grew close to Walter. He often brought over fresh herbs from his garden or shared stories from his youth. In many ways, he became a grandfatherly figure to us, especially to Kyle, who had lost his own grandfather a few years earlier. We returned the kindness by inviting him to dinner or helping him carry groceries. It felt good to be part of a neighborly bond we'd only seen in movies. One Friday evening, Walter invited us over for dinner. The occasion wasn't special, just a casual meal among friends. We accepted gladly and arrived around 6:30 p.m., bringing along a bottle of red wine and a chocolate tart my husband had picked up from a bakery on his way home from work. Walter's house was tidy, almost museum-like, with shelves lined with books and small trinkets from his travels. The smell of roasted chicken and rosemary filled the air, and soft jazz played from a speaker in the corner of the living room. We sat at his round dining table, talking and laughing as we sipped wine. Walter was in high spirits, telling us about a recent reread of The Old Man and the Sea, and how it made him reflect on aging. Dinner was still in the oven, and I excused myself to use the bathroom before it was served. As I walked down the hallway, I passed by Walter's study. The door was slightly ajar, and the glow of his laptop screen caught my eye. I hesitated. I don't know what compelled me to stop. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe something more primal, like instinct. I glanced back to make sure nobody was behind me, then gently pushed the door open a little wider. The room was meticulously organized. On the desk sat his laptop, open and humming quietly. The screen displayed a folder named Backyard Cam. I paused, my curiosity now firmly hooked. I sat down slowly, the guilt already bubbling in my stomach, but I couldn't stop myself from clicking the folder. Inside were hundreds of photos. At first, I couldn't tell what I was looking at. The photos were all taken at night. Each one showed our house, from various angles. Some were from the front yard, some from the side, others from the back. As I clicked through them, my chest tightened. The images weren't just casual snapshots. They were taken methodically, night after night, from places that offered clear views into our windows. There were photos of Kyle watching TV, of me doing dishes in the kitchen. One showed my silhouette behind the curtains in our bedroom. Another showed me brushing my hair in the bathroom, the window barely cracked open. Then I saw it, the picture that made me gasp out loud and nearly drop the mouse. It was of us, Kyle and me, asleep in bed. The angle was from the foot of the bed, perhaps 3 or 4 feet away. The timestamp was 2:43 a.m., taken just 3 nights earlier. My heart pounded in my chest, as if it were trying to escape. I felt cold, as though I had been dunked in ice water. Walter had been inside our home. While we were sleeping, I closed the laptop abruptly. My hands trembled as I stood, every step back down the hallway feeling like walking through sludge. My mind raced, but I tried to keep my face neutral as I returned to the dining table. Kyle and Walter were still chatting, completely unaware of what I had just discovered. I didn't say a word. I walked to Kyle, took his hand, and said, "We need to go. Now." He looked at me confused. "Is everything okay?" "No. I'll explain in the car," I whispered. Walter tilted his head. "Is something wrong, dear?" I ignored him. My hand gripped Kyle's tightly. He stood up without further question, sensing something was terribly wrong, and we walked out the front door. I left my shoes behind. The cool pavement bit into my feet, but I didn't care. Once we were inside our house, I locked the door and checked the windows. I pulled the curtains shut in every room and finally turned to Kyle, who was still trying to process what had happened. I told him everything. We drove to a motel that night, a few towns over. Neither of us slept. We kept the lights on and the door locked with the chain and deadbolt engaged. The next morning, we returned to pack essential belongings and contacted a real estate agent the same day. Within a week, we had listed the house and moved in with Kyle's sister while we figured out our next steps. We never confronted Walter. We never went back to his house. We received no apology, no explanation. We didn't even report it, though in hindsight, maybe we should have. The fear was too fresh, the violation too deep. We just wanted to disappear from his radar entirely. When I finally moved out of my parents' house, I was 24, older than most of my friends who had already flown the nest. My family immigrated from Romania to Canada when I was just a toddler, and while we adjusted to life in a new country, some traditions stuck. My father, especially, was the type who believed daughters should stay home until they were married or at least settled in a long-term relationship. That idea didn't sit well with me. Eventually, after months of convincing and a bit of behind-the-scenes help from my mother, I got the green light. I had been working at a local marketing firm for almost a year and making enough to afford a modest one-bedroom apartment in an L-shaped, 20-story building on the east side of town. The place wasn't brand new, but it was clean, safe, and just a 10-minute walk from the metro station. The city skyline was visible from my balcony on the 14th floor, and I fell in love with the view the first time I saw it. The first few weeks of living on my own were everything I had hoped. I decorated my space with warm lighting, a few posters from art museums I'd visited, and hanging plants that spilled over their pots like they were trying to reach the floor. My favorite part of the apartment was the balcony. It wasn't huge, but it was private, separated from my neighbors by a solid 6-foot concrete wall. I'd sit out there on weekend mornings with coffee and a book, sometimes wrapped in a blanket, just enjoying the quiet hum of the city below. Most of the neighbors I met during my first week were friendly, if not a bit distant. People in the building mostly kept to themselves. A few were young professionals like me, while others were students or elderly residents who had probably lived there for decades. I liked the anonymity of it all. After years of being under my parents' roof, I enjoyed the freedom of being left alone. That was until I met my next-door neighbor. His name was Brian. I ran into him for the first time in the hallway outside our apartments. I was locking my door, heading to work, when he popped out of his unit right beside mine. "Hey there," he said, with a grin that made me instinctively step back. "You just move in?" I nodded. "Yeah, about a week ago." "I'm Brian," he said, extending a hand. "I'm right next door. Let me know if you need help hanging any pictures or setting up furniture." He was probably in his late 30s, nearly 15 years older than me, and built like a linebacker. Not necessarily muscular, but wide, with thick arms and a neck that seemed too short for his torso. His short beard was patchy, and he wore a backward baseball cap and basketball shorts, even though it was chilly outside. I shook his hand politely and thanked him, though I had no intention of asking for help. His eagerness made me uneasy. I couldn't tell if it was just forced friendliness or something else. Over the next few days, I ran into Brian more often than seemed coincidental. He'd appear in the elevator just as I was about to leave. Or he'd be in the lobby when I got home from work, leaning against the wall as if he'd been waiting. Once, I caught him in the hallway pretending to check his mail, even though the mailboxes were downstairs. At first, I chalked it up to bad timing. We lived right next to each other. Of course we'd cross paths. But then I began to notice patterns. I'd hear his door open seconds after mine. If I stepped onto my balcony, I'd hear his sliding door open too. One evening, I came home late after dinner with a friend. I was fumbling with my keys when I heard his door creak open. I didn't look his way, just rushed inside and locked the door behind me. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was living alone for the first time and just needed time to adjust. But things got worse. On a Wednesday night in October, I went to bed early. It had been a long day at work, and I was exhausted. I fell asleep by 9:30, lulled by the soft rumble of traffic in the distance and the occasional gust of wind against my windows. Sometime in the middle of the night, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. My eyes blinked open slowly, and I stared at the ceiling, disoriented. Then I felt it, that strange sensation that someone was watching me. I sat up in bed and looked around. Everything was still. The red glow of my digital clock read 2:47 a.m. I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the room. Nothing. But just as I was about to lie back down, I heard it. Footsteps. Not from above or next door, but inside my apartment. I froze, heart pounding. The footsteps were fast, like someone running, and then I heard the front door slam shut. I bolted out of bed and ran to the door. I flipped the lock and the deadbolt, then pressed my ear against it. A few seconds later, I heard another door slam, this time from next door. Brian's apartment. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, I called my parents and told them what happened. My father wanted to come over immediately, but I told him I was okay. I didn't want to admit it, but part of me felt ashamed for letting this happen, for not locking the balcony door, for ignoring the red flags. That's when I realized the balcony. I had been so sure that no one could get in through it. The concrete wall between my balcony and Brian's was solid, and we were 14 stories up. But I had never locked the sliding glass door because I believed it was impossible to climb over. Only now did I understand how wrong I was. My father came over the next day and helped me install a second lock on the sliding door, one that couldn't be opened from the outside, even if someone managed to get their hand through. We also added a wooden bar across the track for extra security. Still, I felt exposed in that apartment. Every noise set me on edge. I returned to my parents' house that weekend and told them I wanted to move back in. "You just got your own place," my dad said, clearly torn between concern and disappointment. "I know, but I don't feel safe there anymore." They didn't argue. When we returned to the apartment to pack my things, Brian's door was shut. I didn't see him. Maybe he was avoiding us, or maybe he wasn't home. Either way, I didn't care. I just wanted to get out. As we loaded boxes into my dad's truck, I glanced up toward the balconies. Mine was empty, but I could feel eyes on me, even if I couldn't see them. We moved everything out in one day. I left the keys with the landlord and told her I wouldn't be renewing the lease. I gave her only a vague explanation, saying that the area wasn't a good fit for me. I didn't mention Brian. I didn't report anything to the police. I wish I had. Weeks passed. I returned to my old bedroom, now half converted into a storage room, and went back to commuting from my parents' house. It wasn't ideal, but I slept better knowing they were just down the hall. Then one afternoon, my phone buzzed. It was a message from a former neighbor I had exchanged numbers with when I first moved in. Her name was Allison, and she lived 3 doors down from where I used to live. "Hey, are you okay?" the message read. "Something happened in the building." I replied immediately. "What happened?" She sent a link to a news article. The headline made my stomach drop. "Man arrested after breaking into neighbor's apartment through balcony." The article didn't name the suspect, but it described the building, the floor, and the method of entry, scaling the concrete divider and slipping in through an unlocked balcony door. The victim had woken up to find the man standing by her bed. She screamed, and he fled. He was arrested 2 days later after surveillance footage from the lobby identified him. It was Brian. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. My hands shook as I realized how close I had come to being that victim. I had moved out just in time. The article mentioned that the man had previously been questioned in connection with suspicious behavior, though no charges had been filed. I wondered if other women had seen him lurking or had similar experiences that they hadn't reported. I never heard from Brian again. I don't know what happened after the arrest, whether he was sentenced, whether he moved, whether he's out there now somewhere walking free. But I do know this: I lock every window and door now, even on the 20th floor, even in daylight, because sometimes the wall between you and danger is thinner than you think. My name is Julia, and this happened when I was 12 years old. At the time, I lived in a quiet cul-de-sac in a suburb just outside of Denver with my parents and my younger brother, Kevin, who was 10. Our street was the kind of place where kids rode bikes until sunset, neighbors waved from their porches, and the biggest gossip was usually about someone's overgrown hedges. But that summer, everything changed. The trouble started when a man named Roy moved into a small house at the end of the street. He lived with his father, an older man who rarely came outside. Roy drove an old silver sedan that always seemed to be parked just a little crooked in the driveway, and he had the sort of presence that made you shiver even when the sun was shining. He didn't do anything at first. Not directly, but people began to notice things. Mrs. Langston said she saw Roy staring into her living room window one night. The family across from us, the Taylors, caught him crouched behind their bushes with a camera. It became a common topic among the adults, how Roy was weird, how he gave people the creeps, and how something wasn't right. The police were called more than once. I overheard my dad telling my mom that Roy had been arrested a few times, but always for minor offenses, trespassing, loitering, disturbing the peace. Nothing stuck. He always came back. Eventually, parents on the street stopped letting their kids play outside unsupervised. People closed their curtains earlier, and even though no one ever proved anything, the feeling in the neighborhood shifted. We were all waiting for something bad to happen. I didn't really have a clear picture of Roy until the day I saw him for myself. Kevin and I were walking back from our grandparents' house, which was just a few blocks away. It was a warm afternoon in late August, just before the school year started again. We had spent the day eating ice cream, playing board games, and watching old cartoons while our mom ran errands. We could have gotten a ride home, but we wanted to walk. The weather was nice, and it gave us a rare sense of independence. We joked around, pushing each other and talking about the upcoming school year. I remember Kevin asking me if I thought he'd get the same math teacher I had the year before. We turned the corner into our cul-de-sac, and that's when we saw the car. It was Roy's silver sedan, moving slowly past the row of houses. He drove by us once, then turned around at the end of the street and came back. The windows were down, and I caught a glimpse of him behind the wheel. His face was expressionless. His eyes locked onto ours as he passed. "That's the guy," I whispered to Kevin. "No way," he said, squinting. "That's him." "Don't say anything," I told him. "Just keep walking." But Kevin was 10, and 10-year-olds don't always listen. As the car passed us again, he shouted, "Freak." I whipped my head around and glared at him. "Are you crazy?" He shrugged, trying to act tough, but I could tell he was nervous. We picked up the pace. Behind us, the sedan slowed to a stop. My heart jumped. I didn't hear the engine turn off, but I heard the tires crunch on gravel as the car shifted into reverse. I turned to look and saw the sedan backing up toward us. "Run!" I screamed. We bolted. Kevin was faster than me, and he reached the house first. Our mom was standing in the garage, organizing some boxes. She looked up in surprise as we sprinted toward her, breathless and panicked. "What happened?" she asked, stepping toward us. "Car, Roy, he's following us." I gasped. Just then, the sedan pulled into the cul-de-sac again. It did a slow loop, circling in front of our house before heading back the way it came. I don't think he ever expected us to run to someone. That night, we huddled together in the living room, too rattled to sleep. I remember thinking how unfair it was that someone like him could just live there, that we had to change our behavior to stay safe, while he did whatever he wanted. For a while, nothing else happened. Roy's car was still around, but he didn't approach us again. Still, I felt like his eyes were always on us. 2 weeks later, we found out he had been arrested again, this time for harassing a woman at a nearby shopping center. I don't know the details, but he was gone for a while. We all breathed a little easier. I started sleeping with my window cracked again. Then, one day in October, Kevin and I were walking home from school when we saw him. Roy was back. He was standing in his driveway, smoking a cigarette, watching us as we walked past. He didn't say anything, but his eyes followed us all the way home. I felt exposed, like he could see through my skin. For weeks afterward, I was afraid to walk anywhere alone. I avoided the route past his house. I even changed which bus stop I used. Every time I saw a silver sedan, my stomach dropped. One night, I stayed up late doing homework in the den. Everyone else had gone to bed. I stood up to stretch and walked to the window to close the blinds. That's when I saw it. Roy's sedan was parked across the street, engine off, lights off. I froze. He was just sitting there. I couldn't see his face, but I knew it was him. Who else would park in front of our house at 11:30 at night? I backed away from the window and turned off the light, heart hammering in my chest. I tiptoed upstairs and knocked on my parents' bedroom door. My dad opened it, groggy. "What is it?" I told him what I saw. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed a flashlight and his phone and headed outside. By the time he got to the street, the sedan was gone. After that night, my dad installed motion lights in front of the house and got a small security camera for the porch. We never told Kevin what happened. I didn't want him to start sleeping with a baseball bat like I had been. The next week, Roy was arrested again. This time, the charges were serious. He had followed a woman through a Walmart parking lot and assaulted her inside her car. The news spread fast. Everyone on our street was talking about it. That was the last time we saw him. He spent several months in jail, and when he got out, he didn't come back. The house at the end of the street remained empty for nearly a year before a quiet young couple moved in. I always wondered if they knew who had lived there before. Kevin and I still talk about Roy sometimes. We never learned what his end goal was. Was he just watching? Or was he waiting for the right moment to do something worse? I'm in my 20s now, and I still live in Colorado. I have my own apartment, and I check the locks every night. I never open the door without looking through the peephole, and I always trust my gut. When I was 26, I lived in a tiny apartment in the heart of downtown Portland. If you've ever lived in a city, you know how space is treated like gold. Every square inch is accounted for. The building I lived in was one of those old brick complexes that had probably seen better days in the 1970s. My unit was on the third floor at the very end of a narrow hallway, which meant I rarely heard footsteps outside my door. That was one of the reasons I liked it. It gave me a small illusion of privacy in a place where privacy was rare. The apartment itself was little more than a studio. There was just enough room for a full-sized bed, a desk where I worked remotely, and a small kitchenette with a sink that constantly dripped. The bathroom was tucked in behind a sliding door, and the only window faced a grimy alleyway cluttered with dumpsters and the occasional stray cat. It wasn't glamorous, but the rent was manageable, and I liked being close to the city's bookstores and coffee shops. Most of my neighbors were transient, students, out-of-town contractors, and seasonal workers. People came and went so often that I stopped trying to learn names. Aside from a few polite nods in the hallway, I kept to myself. But then Fred moved in. I first noticed him when I was checking my mailbox downstairs. He was tall, probably 6 feet 2, though his slouch made him look shorter. He had long, graying hair that hung in uneven strands around his jaw and a thick, unkempt beard that seemed to swallow the lower half of his face. He wore the same outfit almost every time I saw him, an old plaid flannel shirt and faded jeans with holes in the knees. "Morning," I said one day, offering a polite nod. He stared at me for a beat too long before muttering, "Yeah." That was it. I didn't think much of it at the time. Not everyone is chatty. I figured he might be shy or socially awkward. I've been both at times. But something about Fred's energy unsettled me. It wasn't just silence. It was how heavy that silence felt, like he was measuring people with his eyes, but never bothering to reach a conclusion. Weeks passed. I saw him more often. In the stairwell. In the laundry room. Once, he was just standing in the hallway at 11 p.m., facing the wall like he was listening for something. That night, I closed my door and double-locked it. Then came the night I heard the handle. It was around 1:30 a.m., and I was at my computer, working on a freelance project for a client in another time zone. My desk was right next to the bed, which was right next to the front door. Every inch of that apartment was within arm's reach. At first, I thought I'd imagined it. A faint rattle, metal against metal. Then it came again. The door handle was turning. There were 2 slow twists, followed by a short, deliberate push. The door didn't budge. I had remembered to lock it. But the sound of it pressing inward, the quiet creak of resistance, made my blood run cold. I sat frozen in my chair, eyes wide, waiting. Whoever it was didn't knock, didn't speak. After a few seconds, the handle released, and I heard footsteps moving away down the hallway. I waited a full 5 minutes before I moved. My heart was racing so hard I could hear it in my ears. I crept to the peephole and looked out. The hallway was empty. The next morning, I mentioned it to one of my neighbors, a grad student named Micah. "That's not the first time," he said. "I caught someone jiggling my door last month. I thought it was just a drunk idiot. Did you see who it was?" He hesitated. "I think it was Fred." That same week, I saw Fred again, this time in the laundry room. He was loading clothes into a machine and didn't look up when I walked in. I debated saying something, even just a casual, "Hey, was that you trying my door the other night?" But I didn't. I was too scared. Instead, I did what most people do when they're afraid but unsure nothing. I added a third lock to the door, one of those portable security bars that jam under the knob. I started keeping a flashlight and a heavy wrench next to my bed just in case. And I told myself it was probably over. But it wasn't. Over the next several weeks, I would occasionally wake up in the middle of the night with the feeling that something had disturbed me. Sometimes I thought I heard footsteps outside, but when I checked, no one was there. Other times, I would find the hallway light on when I knew it had been off. One night, I woke up to the sound of soft tapping, barely audible, like fingers brushing against the door. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring up at the ceiling, too scared to breathe. When morning came, I opened the door to find a single penny placed dead center on the welcome mat. I know how that sounds. It's not illegal. It's not even threatening in a traditional sense. But it felt like a message. I didn't call the police. What would I even tell them? There's a man who stares at doors and maybe tries the knob sometimes, and now he's leaving coins. They wouldn't do anything. It wouldn't be enough. So I started documenting everything. Dates, times, descriptions. I kept a small notebook tucked away in my desk drawer. I even considered setting up a camera, but the hallway was technically public space, and I wasn't sure of the legalities. Then, one morning, I was walking down the hallway when I saw Fred coming up the stairs carrying a duffel bag. It was empty. That in itself isn't strange. But something about the way he carried it, limp and loose, like he had just used it and was now returning it, unnerved me. He walked past without a word. I stood still watching him go. That night, I pushed a chair in front of the door and didn't sleep. A few days later, I finally got confirmation that I wasn't just paranoid. Micah knocked on my door one afternoon, his face pale. "You were right," he said. "It's Fred." I caught him on camera. He showed me a grainy clip on his phone. It was from a small camera he had placed in the peephole of his own door. The footage, timestamped 2:21 a.m., showed Fred walking slowly down the hallway, stopping at each door and gently trying the handle. Once, sometimes twice, then moving on. My stomach turned. "Did you show the landlord?" I asked. "Yeah. She says she'll talk to him." "Talk to him?" That's what she said. It wasn't good enough. I seriously thought about moving. I started looking at listings online, and even toured a couple of places. But moving costs money, and breaking the lease would have meant losing my deposit. I told myself I'd wait a bit longer. Maybe Fred would get bored. Maybe the landlord would actually do something. Then came the final straw. It was a Thursday night, and I had fallen asleep early. Around 3 a.m., I woke up with a start. I didn't hear anything, but I felt something. A shift in the air. A presence. I sat up in bed and listened. Silence. I grabbed my flashlight and scanned the room. Everything was in its place. Then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The door. The chain lock was still in place. The deadbolt was locked. But the bar, the portable wedge I always placed under the knob, was lying across the floor. It had been moved. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. At sunrise, I packed a bag and went to stay with a friend across town. The next day, I gave my 30-day notice. I didn't care about the lease. I didn't care about the deposit. I just wanted out. I never saw Fred again. I left before the end of the month and didn't look back. I don't know what eventually happened to him. Maybe the landlord finally got serious. Maybe someone else reported him. Maybe he moved. Or maybe he's still there, trying door handles in the dead of night, waiting for someone to forget a lock. Now, years later, I live in a much safer building with security cameras, a doorman, and a reinforced door. I always check the locks twice. I keep a bat under the bed, and I've never again lived in a unit without a peephole. Some people might say I overreacted, that I let fear get the better of me. But those people have never woken up to find that someone was almost inside. Almost. And in situations like that, almost is more than enough. When I think back to that summer, it feels like a memory from someone else's life. A faded snapshot with soft edges, blurred by time but anchored by one sharp detail, the garage. My name is Emily, and this happened when I was 9 years old. My younger brother, Max, had just turned 7. Our family had recently moved to a quiet neighborhood in a small town in Pennsylvania. The kind of place where neighbors waved across driveways and kids played until the streetlights flickered on. It was 1998, and the world still felt safe in a way it doesn't anymore. Our new house was a modest 2-story colonial with green shutters and a single-car garage that my dad quickly filled with camping gear, tools, and half-unpacked boxes. The backyard was wide and opened onto a sloping grassy hill that led into a thicket of pine trees. Across the street, in a house with faded yellow siding and a slanted roof, lived Mr. Pritchard. He was probably in his late 70s, though to me he looked ancient. Thin and stooped, with a long face and watery blue eyes, he always wore the same brown cardigan, even in the heat of July. He had wispy white hair and a soft, breathy voice that made you lean in to hear him. He lived alone. No wife, no visitors. Just him and a rusted lawnmower that he pushed across his overgrown grass every week like clockwork. The first time we spoke to him, Max and I were riding our bikes in circles on the sidewalk. Mr. Pritchard was sitting on a lawn chair in his driveway, sipping from a tall glass of iced tea that looked more like water with a lemon wedge floating in it. "You two are fast," he said, smiling. His teeth looked too white, like they didn't belong in his mouth. We slowed down, unsure how to respond. Our parents had drilled into us the usual warnings. Don't talk to strangers, don't go into anyone's house, and always stay together. "Do you live across the way?" he asked. I nodded. "We just moved in." "Well, welcome to the neighborhood. If you ever need help fixing your bikes, I've got a full set of tools in the garage," he said, gesturing with a trembling hand toward the detached structure behind him. The garage was set back from the house and looked like it hadn't been painted in decades. The white door was cracked and discolored, and a single light bulb hung above it, unlit in the afternoon sun. "Thanks," I said quickly, tugging Max's arm. "We should get back." He waved at us as we pedaled away. That night, I told my mom about Mr. Pritchard. She smiled and said something like, "He's probably just lonely. Be polite, but don't go into his house, okay?" I nodded, and I really meant it. But he kept showing up. At first, it was just little things, standing at the edge of his driveway when we were outside, waving from his porch when we walked the dog. Then one day, he crossed the street. It was a Saturday morning, and Max and I were drawing chalk shapes on the driveway. Mr. Pritchard walked slowly over, holding something in his hand. "I found this in my garage and thought you might like it," he said, offering a small toy car, an old metal matchbox model with chipped paint. Max's eyes lit up. "Thanks," he said, reaching for it. I stepped between them. "We're not allowed to take things from people." Mr. Pritchard smiled, lowering the toy. "It's just a little gift. No harm in that." I shook my head. "We should be getting ready for lunch." He left the car on the sidewalk and walked back to his yard. Max picked it up as soon as he was gone. "Don't play with it," I told him. "Just don't." "But it's cool." "I don't care." Later that week, it happened again. We were walking home from the park, and Mr. Pritchard was outside, kneeling in his front yard like he'd been doing yard work. But there were no tools, and the grass hadn't been cut. As we passed, he stood and called out, "Kids, come here a sec." I froze. Max hesitated, then started walking toward him. "Max, no." Mr. Pritchard smiled. "I think your dog ran into my garage earlier. Little black one, right?" I left the side door open. "Must have wandered in." "We didn't have a dog." I knew that instantly. He was lying. I grabbed Max's hand. "He's right here," I said, tugging him away. Mr. Pritchard's smile dropped for a fraction of a second. Then he nodded slowly. Must have been another dog. My mistake." Max looked confused, but he followed me home without question. I didn't tell my parents. Not yet. I wasn't sure they'd believe me. Mr. Pritchard was old, polite, and by all outward appearances, harmless. But something deep in my gut told me otherwise. The next time was worse. We were playing with our neighbor's cat, a fluffy gray tabby named Spindle, when Mr. Pritchard appeared at the edge of our lawn. "Hey kiddos," he said, smiling. "Spindle was just over at my place. I think she ran into the garage again. You want to help me get her out?" Max took a step forward. "Max, no." I snapped. "She's not there," I said firmly, standing up. "She's been here the whole time." He looked confused for a second. Then his smile returned, wider than before. "Well, maybe I was mistaken." That night, I told my mom everything. She listened carefully, then called my dad into the room. I repeated it all. How he tried to get us into the garage, how he lied about the dog and the cat. My dad's face tightened. "You're not to speak to him again. Either of you. What if he comes over?" Max asked. "Come inside. Don't answer. Don't talk. Just walk away." From that point on, we weren't allowed outside without one of our parents nearby. My dad installed a motion light facing the street, and our mom started keeping the curtains drawn during the day. If Mr. Pritchard noticed the change, he didn't show it. But he stopped waving. That winter, we learned he had passed away. We overheard my parents talking about it in the kitchen. "Heart failure," my mom said. The police cleared out the house. No family to claim anything. I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, guilt, curiosity. I didn't know how to process it. He hadn't hurt us. He hadn't even touched us. But I knew that something terrible could have happened if Max had followed him into that garage. A few weeks later, the house was boarded up, the garage padlocked. A truck came to haul away the contents. My dad said the garage was packed with old furniture, boxes of papers, and junk. But he never gave details. Years passed. We moved to a different town, then eventually out of state. Max and I grew up, went to college, started jobs, lived our lives. But sometimes, when we're together, we talk about him. Do you ever wonder what was in that garage? Max asked me once. All the time, I said. But I don't really want to know. Because deep down, I think we both suspect the truth. And I'm just grateful we never had to find out. When you're 11, the world feels both infinite and incredibly close. You think you understand danger because you've seen it on TV, but real danger, true, unpredictable, skin-prickling danger, is something you only recognize after it's already too close. My name's Lucas, and this happened in the summer of 2002. I had just finished 5th grade and was spending most of June with my best friend, Dylan. We lived in a small town in northern Michigan, the kind of place where houses are spaced out by long gravel driveways and kids ride their bikes until dusk without checking in. Behind Dylan's house was a massive wooded area, dense, slightly hilly, with trails that led to an old creek and a tangle of forgotten deer paths. Our parents trusted us to roam there, so long as we stayed together and came back by dinner. That summer, we were obsessed with two things: building forts and pulling off harmless pranks. We weren't mean about it, just dumb, bored kids trying to entertain ourselves. We'd leave sticks arranged like arrows on people's lawns or knock on doors and sprint away. Childish stuff. One afternoon, we were riding our bikes near the edge of the neighborhood when we spotted a man walking alone down the road. He looked out of place right away. He wasn't someone we recognized, and in our town, you pretty much knew everyone by sight. He was tall, wiry, and wore a long coat despite the heat. His hair was dark and shaggy, and he walked with a strange limp, like one leg was just slightly too long for the other. Dylan was the one who suggested it. "Let's mess with him," he whispered. I hesitated. What kind of mess? Just ring our bike bells and zoom past. He'll jump. It sounded harmless enough. We waited until he was close, then dashed past him on our bikes, dinging our bells and shouting nonsense like, "Watch out!" and "Aliens are here." The man flinched, but then did something unexpected. He smiled. Not in a friendly, "you got me" sort of way. It was something else, sharp and slow, like it took effort to pull the corners of his mouth up. His eyes followed us intently, and even though we were already pedaling away, I felt them. Like they hooked onto me. We laughed it off and rode into the woods behind Dylan's house, taking the narrow trail that looped around the creek. After about 10 minutes, we stopped at our half-finished fort, a little lean-to made of sticks and old tarps, and started adding to it. But something felt off. Both of us were quiet, listening to the woods in that way you do when you think you're not alone. Every crack of a twig made my stomach twitch. I told myself it was nothing, probably just a deer. Then Dylan said it. He followed us. "What? That guy?" I saw him. He was at the trail entrance. I turned to him sharply. "Are you serious?" He nodded slowly. "I saw his coat. I think he's in here." We froze, listening, and then we heard it. Not footsteps. Breathing. Shallow, wheezing breaths, just beyond the trees behind us. We didn't speak. We just ran. We shot out of the fort like bullets, sprinting down the trail, ducking under branches, our feet pounding the packed dirt. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My lungs burned, and my legs felt loose, like they might give out at any second. Dylan was just behind me, gasping. Then I heard crashing. Not a deer. Not a raccoon. Heavy, two-footed crashing through the brush. He was chasing us. The trail forked near the creek. I veered left. Dylan veered right. I didn't stop running until I reached the edge of the woods, where the trees thinned and the sunlight broke through. I collapsed onto the grass near the side of Dylan's house, panting so hard I thought I might throw up. But Dylan wasn't there. I waited. 5 minutes. 10. Still no sign. I was about to go back in when he burst out from the trees, scratched and wild-eyed. We didn't speak at first. Just stared at each other, too winded and shaken to form words. "Did you see him?" I finally asked. Dylan nodded. "He chased me, all the way to the ravine. I think I lost him near the rocks." We told Dylan's mom that we saw a fox and got spooked. She didn't ask questions. That night, I lay in bed unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that smile, that unnatural stretch of lips. And I kept thinking, what if we hadn't run? What if we had stayed to see what he wanted? The next day, I convinced myself we had imagined it. But Dylan didn't. He started carrying a pocket knife, even around his house. He avoided the woods completely. I tried to brush it off, but something deep inside me had shifted. I didn't go into the woods without an adult for the rest of the summer. Weeks passed, and no one else reported seeing the man. It was like he had vanished. Years later, when Dylan and I were both in college, we met up for drinks during a winter break. We hadn't talked about that day in years, but eventually we did. Do you remember his face? Dylan asked quietly, stirring his drink. I nodded. The smile. He looked down at his hands. I don't think he was just some creep. What do you mean? I don't think a normal person would have chased two kids through the woods like that. There was something wrong with him. We sat in silence for a while. Then Dylan said something I'll never forget. Sometimes I think he wasn't chasing us because we pranked him. I think he wanted us to follow him. And when we didn't, he turned it around. I still think about that day, about the tall man in the coat, and the way he moved through the woods like he belonged there. This happened when I was 13, during the summer before 8th grade. We lived in a quiet neighborhood on the edge of a small town in eastern Washington. It was the kind of place with split-level homes, wide sidewalks, and enough trees to make the streets feel shaded and slow. Everyone knew each other by last name, and kids walked their dogs without thinking twice. I had a golden retriever named Toby, big, slow, and friendly to a fault. I usually walked him around 7 p.m., just before it got dark. My mom liked me to be home by sunset, and I always was. I didn't have a phone back then, just a watch with a rubber strap and a scratched face. I didn't need anything else. Our route was always the same. We'd go down our street, turn left at the corner, and loop around the block. It took about 20 minutes with Toby's pace, maybe 30 if he stopped to sniff every tree. One evening in late July, we were halfway through our walk when I noticed a red pickup truck driving slowly down the road in the opposite direction. It was old, boxy, with a dull paint job and a missing hubcap on the passenger side. The windows were tinted, and I couldn't see the driver clearly. It passed us once, turned at the end of the street, and came back the other way. I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone was lost. Maybe they lived nearby. But something about the way the truck moved, slower than it should, rolling past me like it was waiting for something, made my stomach tighten. It passed me again, then turned down another block. I told myself it was fine. I wasn't far from home. Toby was with me. I kept walking. But then it came back. This time, the truck didn't drive past. It crept up behind us, silent except for the low hum of its engine. I glanced over my shoulder and saw it maybe 20 feet away, crawling forward with no headlights on. It was dusk now, light fading, shadows stretching. The truck's shape looked darker than it should have, like it was absorbing what little light was left. I couldn't see the driver. The windows were too dark. I stopped walking. Toby stopped too, tail wagging slightly, unaware. The truck stopped. I didn't move. I didn't call out. I just stood there, heart pounding, trying to decide what to do. I knew I couldn't run. Not with Toby. He was too slow, too clumsy, and I couldn't leave him. So I did the only thing I could think of. I turned around and faced the truck. I didn't say anything. I just stared straight at it, at the shadow behind the glass, at the shape of the person inside. I stood there for what felt like a full minute. Then the truck shifted slightly, just a twitch of movement, and slowly rolled backward, easing into a driveway across the street. It sat there for another few seconds, engine still running, before pulling out again, this time turning away from us and disappearing down the road. I didn't wait to see where it went. I tugged on Toby's leash and cut through a stranger's yard, hopping their low fence and walking behind houses until I reached my street. I kept checking behind me, expecting to hear tires on pavement, expecting to see that red truck turn the corner again. It never did. When I got home, my mom was in the kitchen. She asked me how the walk was, and I said it was fine. I didn't tell her what happened. Not because I didn't trust her, because I knew what she'd say. No more walks alone. And I needed those walks. I needed the space, the quiet, the routine. So I kept it to myself. But after that night, I changed the route. I walked faster. I avoided the streets with fewer houses. And every time I heard a car behind me, I turned around and looked. I made sure they knew I saw them. A few months later, I saw the truck again. It was parked near the edge of town, just off a gravel road that led to an old logging trail. I was in the passenger seat of my friend's mom's minivan, and I spotted it through the trees as we drove by. Same dull red paint, same missing hubcap. There was no one inside. I never saw it again after that. I still think about it sometimes. How close I came to something I don't even have a name for. How different that night could have been if I'd been smaller, younger, or if I hadn't turned around. People always tell you to trust your instincts. But what they don't say is what to do when those instincts tell you to stand still, not run. Just stare back. Celia and I weren't close friends. We were neighbors. We waved across driveways, exchanged small talk at the mailbox, and sometimes walked our dogs at the same time. She was in her early 40s, I think. Tall, quietly elegant, with dark hair she wore in a bun and a voice that barely rose above a whisper. Her husband, Graham, was a quiet man too, older than her by at least 10 years. They didn't have children, just a white Labrador named Scout and a modest brick house with green shutters and perfectly trimmed hedges. I always thought of them as one of those couples who had found peace in routine. I was wrong. It started in late September, right after the weather turned. The neighborhood got quiet around that time of year. Kids back in school. Windows shut against the chill. One morning, I saw Celia walking Scout alone, no Graham in sight. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the way she looked when she saw me. Tense. Distracted. I asked how she was doing. She smiled too quickly. Good. Just tired. She didn't stop to chat. Just nodded and moved on. A few nights later, I was taking out the trash when I saw a car parked one house down from theirs. A black sedan I didn't recognize. It was late, close to midnight, and the car's engine was still running. The driver was a man. I couldn't make out much in the dark, but something about the way he sat there, perfectly still, got under my skin. I stood on my porch for a moment, pretending to adjust the trash bag, then watched as he turned off the engine, got out, and walked quickly towards Celia's house. He didn't use the front door. He went around the side, disappearing into the shadows near the back gate. I didn't see him leave. The next day, I saw Celia again. She looked even more tired than before. There were faint shadows under her eyes, and her posture was stiff. When I asked about Graham, her answer was automatic. He's away for work. That was strange. He was retired. I didn't push it, but now I was paying attention. Over the next week, the black sedan returned twice more. Always late. Always quiet. The man never used the front door. And each morning after, Celia looked a little more hollowed out. By the third visit, I stopped pretending I wasn't watching. I sat at my upstairs window just before midnight and waited. The car arrived on schedule. This time, I got a better look at the man. Mid-30s maybe. Clean-shaven. Wore a dark jacket and moved like someone who didn't want to be noticed. He entered through the side again. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't know what I was witnessing exactly, but it didn't feel like a simple affair. The way he moved, the way Celia looked afterward, it didn't feel mutual. It felt strained. The next morning, I crossed paths with her on the sidewalk. "Hey," I said. "Rough night." She flinched. It was subtle, but I saw it. "No," she said. "Just didn't sleep well." That was the last time I saw her walk the dog. 2 days later, I noticed the blinds in their upstairs window, the one facing the street, were always closed now. They used to be open during the day. You could see the bookshelves, the soft yellow lamp, the corner of a writing desk. Now always shut. The black car didn't come back for a while. Then one night in early October, I woke up at 2 a.m. to the sound of banging. Not loud, but rhythmic, like someone trying to open a stuck drawer. It came from Celia's house. I got up and went to the window. Lights were on upstairs. The blinds twitched, then pulled back slightly. I saw a glimpse of her face, just her eyes and forehead. She was looking out, not at me but toward the street. Then the blinds closed again. I didn't know what to do. I considered calling the police. But what would I say? I didn't know if she was in danger. I didn't even know if she wanted help. The next afternoon, I saw Graham for the first time in weeks. He was raking leaves in the front yard, calm, steady, like nothing was wrong. I called out to him. "Hey, haven't seen you around." He looked up and smiled. "Yeah, I've been out of town. Everything okay?" "Oh yeah," he said. "Celia's just been under the weather. She's resting a lot." I nodded, but my stomach tightened. Something didn't add up. That night, the lights in the upstairs room stayed on until dawn. The next morning, I walked my dog past their house. The air was cold, and the leaves had turned brittle overnight. As I passed, I looked up. The window was open. Just an inch. Just enough to hear something I wasn't supposed to. A man's voice. Not Graham. It wasn't loud, but I heard one word repeated twice. No. No. Then silence. I stopped walking. My dog tugged at the leash. I kept standing there. Then the blinds moved. Someone was there. Watching. I walked away. That day, I wrote down everything I'd seen. Dates, times, details. Not because I planned to do anything with it, but because I needed it to be real. I needed to know I wasn't imagining it. That night, I waited again. The car didn't come. But around midnight, I saw movement in the upstairs window. Celia. Standing there. Backlit by the lamp. She was holding something. I squinted. It was a notebook. She opened it, flipped through a few pages, then tore one out. She folded it once, then again. Then she opened the window and let it fall. I ran outside. The paper had landed on their front lawn, just past the sidewalk. I picked it up, heart pounding. It was a note. Handwritten. Short. Help me. Please. Don't tell him. No name. No explanation. Just that. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I called the police. I told them I was worried about my neighbor, that I'd seen suspicious activity, that I thought she might be in danger. The officer was polite, said they'd send someone to check in. I watched from my window as a cruiser pulled up around noon. A uniformed officer walked to the front door. Graham answered, smiled, spoke calmly. The officer was gone in 10 minutes. No one was arrested. No one was taken away. That night, the window stayed dark. No lights. No movement. No Celia. I waited for days. Nothing. Then, almost a week later, a moving truck pulled into the driveway. 2 men loaded boxes into the back. Graham stood on the porch, directing them. I didn't see Celia. Not once. I considered asking, saying something, but I stayed inside. By the end of the day, the house was empty. A for sale sign went up the next morning. I never got another note. Never saw the black sedan again. I don't know what happened to her. Maybe she left voluntarily. Maybe she didn't. But I still have the note, folded in the back of an old book. The ink has faded a little, but the words are still there. Help me. Please. Don't tell him. I was 12 when it happened, though I remember it with the clarity of something that occurred yesterday. Not because it was especially violent, though it could have been, but because it didn't make sense, and no one ever really talked about it afterward. That silence, more than the event itself, is what stayed with me. My parents had left town for the day, driving to Columbus to pick up a used car my dad had bought from some guy on Craigslist. It was summer, I was off school, and I didn't want to sit in a hot back seat for 5 hours. They left me at home, with my grandparents just next door if I needed anything. We lived in a small neighborhood on the edge of a rural Ohio town. The kind of place with cracked sidewalks, backyard sheds, and neighbors who waved whether they liked you or not. It was a warm, overcast afternoon. I remember it was just cloudy enough that the sky looked faded, like someone had dimmed the world a little. I spent most of the day watching cartoons and eating cereal out of the box. My parents had left me with a list of rules. Don't use the stove, don't answer the door, don't go outside without telling Grandma first. I followed most of them. Around 3:30 p.m., I was sitting cross-legged on the carpet in the living room, watching a rerun of The Simpsons, when I heard the doorbell. I muted the TV and sat still. One ring, then silence. I got up and walked to the front window, carefully pulling back the curtain. Standing on the porch was David. He was one of our neighbors, lived 4 houses down on the other side of the street. I didn't know his last name. No one ever used it. He was just David, and everyone seemed to say his name with a kind of caution. I knew who he was, but I didn't really know him. He lived with his elderly mother and didn't work, at least not that anyone could tell. He didn't mow his lawn, didn't say hello, didn't wave. He always looked tired, like he hadn't slept in days. I'd seen him a few times walking to the gas station, sometimes early in the morning when I was waiting for the school bus. I didn't want to open the door, but then he spoke through it, loud enough to hear clearly. Hey, your grandpa said it was okay to come by. I just need to grab something real quick. That didn't sound right. I didn't move. He knocked again, harder this time. Come on, he said you'd let me in. Just 1 minute. I stood there, frozen. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to open the door, but he sounded sure of himself. And he used my grandpa's name. Then I heard the doorknob. It turned, and the door opened. I had forgotten to lock it. David stepped inside without hesitation. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't even looking at me. His eyes were glassy, his face flushed. He looked like he'd been drinking, though I didn't recognize that expression until much later in life. He shut the door behind him slowly, then turned to face me. "Where's the kitchen?" he asked. He didn't wait for an answer. He walked past me, heading down the short hallway. I followed him at a distance, not sure whether to yell, run, or hide. I didn't have a phone back then. My grandparents' house was next door, but it might as well have been a mile away. When I reached the kitchen, he was already standing by the counter. That's when I saw the knife. He was holding it loosely in his right hand. Not a kitchen knife. A hunting knife. The kind you'd use to get a deer. Long blade, dark handle, the edge dulled in places with use. The way he held it was casual, like he'd forgotten it was even there. I didn't say a word. He looked around the room, then back at me. "You know," he said, slurring a little, "people lie. But I can always tell. Always." He took a step toward me. I backed up. He stopped. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. Then I heard the front door. It opened with a creak, followed by the familiar sound of boots on the carpet. "Lucas?" It was my grandfather's voice, calm but firm. David didn't move. Then my grandfather stepped into the kitchen and stopped. His eyes went to the knife. "What the hell is going on here?" David blinked slowly. "She said I could come in." My grandfather's voice dropped. "Who said that?" "Your wife." "No, she didn't," he said. "Put the knife down." David stared at him, like he was trying to decide if it was worth arguing. I said, "Put it down." David slowly lowered the knife and placed it on the counter. Then he stepped back, hands slightly raised. "I didn't touch him," he said. "That's as close as you're ever going to get," my grandfather replied. "Now get out." David walked past him, out the door, and down the front steps without another word. My grandfather waited until the door was shut before he moved. Then he locked it, deadbolt and knob. He didn't say anything right away, just looked at me. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, though my throat was tight and I couldn't speak. He sat me down at the table and poured a glass of water. I didn't want it, but I drank it anyway. He didn't call the police. I asked him later why not. "Sometimes it's better to handle things quietly," he said. And that was the end of it. My parents came home that night. My grandfather told them what happened, but it was quick, almost like a footnote. My dad was furious, but not at Grandpa. He wanted to go confront David, but my mom stopped him. "He's not stable," she said. "Don't escalate it." A week later, David was gone. His house went dark. No lights, no noise. A few people said he'd moved. Others said he was in rehab. My grandparents never confirmed either way. I never saw him again. For a long time, I accepted what happened as just one of those strange things that adults didn't like to talk about, like family fights or money problems, or why certain neighbors didn't get invited to block parties. But as I got older, I thought about it more. Why did David come to our house? Why did he bring that knife? And what would have happened if my grandfather hadn't come home when he did? I still don't know the answers, and I'm not sure I want to, because what scares me most isn't the memory of David's face, or the sight of that knife in his hand. It's the silence that followed, the way the adults in my life closed the book on it, like it was a chapter that didn't matter. But it did. It mattered a lot. My husband and I used to live in a second-floor apartment in a 4-story building, part of a dense row of units stretched along a narrow street just outside Chicago. We were both in our early 30s at the time, working full-time jobs and living a fairly uneventful life. Our apartment was small but comfortable, a one-bedroom with tall windows, hardwood floors, and a view into the building across the street. That building was nearly identical to ours, red brick, flat roof, black wrought iron balconies on each floor. From our living room window, we could see directly into several other units across the way. It was city living. We kept our blinds open during the day, only closing them at night when the lights were on. It never occurred to us that someone might be watching. The first sign was small, almost too small to notice. One evening, I was watching TV while my husband, Mark, washed dishes. As I turned toward the window, I noticed a blinking red light in the darkness across the street. It was faint, barely visible, and I assumed it was some kind of appliance, a router or a power strip, or maybe a smoke alarm. But the next night, the light was still there. Same place, same faint blink. I mentioned it to Mark. "Do you see that? Across from us?" He looked, squinting through the glass. "Yeah," Weird. Maybe it's a camera. He said it like a joke, but the idea lodged in my head. I started paying attention. Every night, the red light blinked once every 2 seconds. Always in the same window. The apartment directly across from ours, second floor, right in line with our living room. That window was always dark. No lights on. No motion. No signs of life. Just the blinking. After a few days, I noticed something else. The light only turned on when we were home. When we left the apartment for dinner or errands, the window across the way stayed dark. But within minutes of us coming home and turning on our lights, the red blink would return. Mark thought I was being paranoid. It's probably just a coincidence, he said. People leave their electronics by the window all the time. So I tested it. One night, I left the living room blinds wide open and turned on every light in the apartment. Then I stood in the kitchen and waited. Sure enough, within 5 minutes, the red light appeared. I walked to the window and stared directly at it. It didn't stop. It just kept blinking. That week, I started keeping our blinds closed during the evenings. Mark teased me about it, said I was acting like we lived in a spy movie, but I couldn't shake the feeling. One morning, I opened my laptop and found a strange email in my inbox. No subject line, no text, just a link. I didn't click it. I showed it to Mark, and he told me to delete it. It's probably spam, he said. A phishing link, but it felt connected. I couldn't explain why. I deleted it, but I kept thinking about it. A few days later, a friend from work sent me a message. "Hey, is this you?" she wrote, along with a link to a video. I hesitated, then clicked. The video was from a distance. You could see me and Mark in our living room, sitting on the couch. The camera was positioned across the street, directly across, angled down just enough to capture our entire living space. No sound, just video. It had been uploaded anonymously to a site I'd never heard of. The title was just a string of numbers, date and time. I felt sick. We called the police immediately. An officer came out, took a report, and promised to follow up. He was polite, but I could tell he wasn't overly concerned. Could be a prank, he said, or someone testing out a new drone or camera. I showed him the blinking light. He looked through the window, nodded, and jotted something down. Best thing to do is keep your blinds closed. We'll see what we can find. That was it. They never followed up. We told the landlord, who claimed there was nothing they could do unless the other building's management got involved. We even tried calling that building's office, but no one returned our messages. Mark started sleeping with a baseball bat by the bed. I stopped opening the blinds entirely. A week later, another video surfaced. This one was longer. It showed us eating dinner, laughing, cleaning up. At one point, Mark kissed me on the forehead. The title was our apartment number. I didn't go to work the next day. I couldn't stop wondering how long it had been going on. How many videos were out there? Who had seen them? Who had saved them? We moved out within the month. Found a new place on the opposite side of town. Top floor. No direct view into our windows. We bought blackout curtains and security cameras. The new landlord thought we were overly cautious. We never explained why. Sometimes, I still search for those videos. Some are gone. Some have been reposted. Others are archived on obscure sites, buried under usernames I don't recognize. I've reported them all, but I don't think they'll ever fully disappear.